Hello and welcome everyone to this video talking about how to improve your relationships using some skills from a type of therapy we refer to as Dialectical Behavior Therapy. My name is Dr. Anastasia Hronis. I am a clinical psychologist and founder of the Australian Institute for Human Wellness. So in my work, I practice clinically seeing clients for all sorts of mental health related concerns. But I also work in academia at the University of Technology, Sydney, where we do a lot of teaching and research. I thought this was a really important topic to cover, building and improving our relationships. Now, dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, as we refer to it in the short form, has a lot of different skills that it encompasses. And if you have a look at some of the other videos that I'm doing as well, you'll see that DBT includes skills relating to mindfulness. It includes skills relating to managing our emotions in the day-to-day. It includes some skills around how to navigate managing quite intense and distressing emotions. But there's also this module about building interpersonal relationships. And as I go through this video and I talk about relationships, I'm talking about all sorts of relationships. So not just romantic relationships, but friendships we might have as relationships, relationships we might have with our family, relationships that we have with our colleagues at work, our relationship with our boss, etc. And these skills are really very applicable to all sorts of relationships. That's why I think they're really useful to have a concept and an understanding of. Now, I started off this presentation with a quote from Brené Brown. Now, if any of you are not familiar with Brené Brown's work, I highly, highly recommend that you pop online and search her up, particularly on YouTube. She's a social worker by profession, but I believe she has one of the most viewed TED Talks ever. And her main topic that she talks about is this notion of connection with other people. So this quote from her, she says, "I define connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship." I think this summarizes and highlights the benefits of connection so well. And when we think about our relationships and connections with others, we know as psychologists that this is really integral to our overall mental health and well-being. Loneliness is on the rise. It's said that we're in a loneliness sort of epidemic at the moment. And connection with other people, whether that be acquaintances or whether that be very deep connections with other people, they're all important. And different people fulfill different needs and roles within our life. So it is important that we have a broad spectrum of people with whom we do have connections with. Now, I want to start off by, I guess, reducing this notion of the elements of relationships to 3 key points. So in DBT, or Dialectical Behavior Therapy, we talk about having an understanding of the priorities in relationships. So one priority that we refer to is the objective of an interaction with someone else. So this is the outcome that I'm hoping to achieve through my interaction with someone. So for example, if I'm having a conversation with my landlord about the rent that I pay, the objective in that scenario might be that I want to negotiate the rent that I'm paying. And in that interaction, the objective may be my key goal and priority, right? So when we refer to objective, we're talking about the outcome that we hope to achieve. Another priority that we can consider in interpersonal interactions is that of the relationship. So this refers to that element of connection that I have with the other person. How valuable and meaningful is my relationship with this person in my life? If I consider again the landlord situation, I might have a clear priority around the objective that I'm hoping to obtain by interacting with the landlord, but the relationship I have with them may be less important. You know, I care for the person as I do someone else, but it's not a relationship where I derive a lot of sort of meaning and sustenance in my life. If I compare that to someone like a very close friend, well, that relationship and connection I have with that person is incredibly important. And then the third element that we always want to be considering when we're thinking about our interpersonal interactions with other people is the notion of self-respect. Is my interaction with this other person one in which I'm able to maintain a level of self-respect, but also respect for the other person and respect for the relationship itself? Now, in interactions with different people, we might find that the priority shifts. With one person we interact with, it may be that the objective is really clearly the priority. It may be that the relationship and connection is the priority, or it may be that me maintaining my self-respect is the priority. And these can shift and change depending on the person and depending on the situation. Now, to go into this notion of respect and self-respect a little bit further, it's important to think of communication and communication styles on a spectrum. So in the middle, what we hope to aim for is this idea of assertive communication. However, if we move up one end of the spectrum, we have what might be considered a more aggressive style of communication. So this is communicated not only through what we're saying, but things like our tone of voice and our body language as well. So if we have someone with aggressive communication, it may be that they're quite hostile in their manner. It may be that they're speaking with quite a harsh, loud tone, and it might be that they're saying things in a very direct, blunt, or unpleasant sort of way. If we think about communication style down the other end of the spectrum, we have what we'd refer to as a passive style of communication. So this is a style of communication where I may be not very willing to put forward my opinions, my thoughts, my wants, or my needs in a situation. And in terms of how this is communicated, well, it might be by me being quite quiet, having a very sort of soft tone of voice when I'm communicating, maybe not saying no to something and just sort of being a bit of a yes person, or maybe just not sort of speaking much at all and putting forward what I would like to say. So when we have a more aggressive style of communication, we talk about not having respect for other people. But when we have a more passive style of communication, we lose the respect that we have for ourselves. So when we think about assertive communication, then it's this ideal balance between being able to be both respectful to the other person, but also being respectful towards ourselves and the relationship we hold. So this is essentially that balance between being able to hear respectfully what someone else has to say in their opinion, even if we might disagree with it, but still being able to put forward our opinion in a kind yet assertive, confident manner. This enables us to hold the respect for both ourselves and other people. Now, I want to talk you through a practical way to start to apply this. So we have a bit of a guideline for having conversations, and ideally, this is used when we need to have a conversation that might be a bit difficult. Hopefully, it's easier for us to have an assertive communication style with people that we feel quite comfortable with, or in situations that don't bring out a level of stress within us. This guideline is for situations where we think we might run the risk of perhaps falling into more of an aggressive communication pattern, or potentially falling into that passive communication style. So this is going to help us be assertive, maintaining respect for ourselves, but also maintaining respect for the other person. Now, DBT is known for its acronyms. It likes to put most skills that it teaches into an acronym. So the acronym that we use here is something called DEAR. So the DEAR component, DEAR, stands for, or essentially helps us know what to say in a difficult interpersonal situation. And the man component, MAN, stands for the words and reminders that tell us how to communicate this. So we're going to go through each of these letters and what they stand for in a little bit more detail now. Okay, so if we think about the D, so this is the first part of the D man. So D stands for describe. So the first sentence, and I like to think of this as 4 sentences. We don't need to elaborate too much. It can be fairly quick and concise. So the first sentence is describe. Describe the situation. When we do this, we want to stick to the facts and tell the other person the situation that we're reacting to, or that we have a thought about or an opinion about. So if I use an example, it might be, you told me that you'd be home for dinner, but you didn't get here until 11. So as I communicate this, I'm communicating facts of the situation. I'm not communicating my thoughts or my opinions or how I feel about that situation. It's simply the facts of what has happened. This is really important because it gives the other person context as to what we're referring to. So the next part, E, stands for express. So this is where we express our feelings, our thoughts, our opinions, right? So we don't want to assume that the other person knows how we feel. And when we do this, a really, really key point that I can't stress enough is starting the sentence and communicating using I statements or I phrases. So I start worrying if you're home late. There's a real big difference between using an I statement versus a you statement. So a you statement might be something like, you never come home on time, or you always say something and don't follow through, versus I worry when you're home late. When we use you statements, and it's a very sort of easy thing to fall into the trap of doing, and many of us often do it. But when we use you statements, the other person is more likely to get defensive and react rather than actually be able to calmly take in what we're saying. So when we talk with I statements, we're taking ownership for our own thoughts, feelings, opinions, and expressions, and we're simply communicating this to the other person. So the next part is A, assert. So we've done describe the situation, express our feelings and opinions, and now we're going to assert. So we're going to ask for what we want or assert what we want. So in this situation, as an example, I would really like it if you'd call to tell me when you're going to be late. Okay, so I'm asking for what I want. And then finally, reinforce is our R. So reinforcing is essentially explaining to the other person what the positive effect might be if they go along with what you're asking for. So the positive effect in this situation might be that I would be so relieved if you would do that. So if we just sort of simplify it into the 4 sentences, we're simplifying it to be, you told me that you'd be home for dinner, but you didn't get here until 11 o'clock. I often actually start to worry if you're home late, and I'd really like it if you just call to let me know when you're going to be late. If you were to do that, it would actually provide a lot of relief for me. So it's concise, it's to the point, we're communicating a message quite clearly, because often when we are finding that we're having to communicate something that's difficult, we can end up using a lot of words and being a bit verbose in the way that we communicate. So this is a very clear, concise way, very to the point, and it communicates to the other person what we're referring to, how we feel about it, and what we'd ideally like. So as I say, this template, I recommend people use it as sort of like 4 sentences. And if you know you have a difficult conversation coming up, say you need to have you want to ask your boss for a raise, for example, you can actually sit down and think through these 4 steps as to what you might like to say and how you might be able to most concisely and clearly communicate to your boss that you would like a raise. Or if you have to have a difficult conversation with a coworker who's not contributing to their part of the work that you're meant to be doing. This is a really useful template for breaking it down. Now, if we move on to the final part of this, so the DEAR is the first part of the acronym and the MAN is the second part. This tells us how we want to communicate, so the style and manner in which we want to communicate. So M stands for being mindful. So when we refer to this, we're talking about keeping focused on our goals and being mindful and very present in the conversation. So we really just want to be focused on what it is we're trying to communicate, not being distracted and not getting off topic, but sort of holding our position. Now, of course, there's room to move in this, and we get to N, which is, negotiate, if that's applicable. But there is some usefulness in this concept of what we refer to as a bit of a broken record. So if someone sort of tries to direct the conversation in another direction, or if they start saying, oh, but remember the time when you did X, Y, Z, it's very easy for these conversations to get on track. We really just want to stay grounded and focused in what we're saying. And it might be that we just sort of continue to say the same thing somewhat over and over again. So if in this situation, someone starts talking about other situations or variations, you might just come back to, I would still just really like a call. And it might be that you repeat that a number of times. So staying mindful, focused on the present and what we're trying to communicate. The next part is the notion of appearing confident. And again, when we think about assertive communication style, this is really important to be confident in the way that we're communicating, not passive, but also not aggressive. So we want to use a confident tone of voice, and we want to be confident in terms of our physicality. So this might be the way that we're standing and holding ourselves, and also making eye contact with the person. And it also means not necessarily sort of going back on what we're saying if we don't truly want to do that, or not necessarily giving answers like, I'm not too sure, etc. So I want to be quite confident in the way that we're communicating. And then finally, if applicable, and we're willing to, we might want to consider negotiation. So it may be that we offer or ask the other person for solutions to the problem if they're not really wanting to do what we have asserted. We might sort of reduce our request, or might offer some other solution. So in this example, it might be about, well, how about you at least send me a text rather than a phone call if you think you're going to be late. Or we might put it back on the other person and simply ask them, what do you think we should do in this situation? If a phone call is not feasible for you, do you have another solution that you can offer? So the negotiation part really shows that we're open to considering other options, and that the goal here is finding an outcome that works for both people. Again, when we think of assertive communication, we're being respectful to both ourselves and both the other person by considering, if they don't agree to what it is that we've asked for, we're willing to consider other alternatives, but those alternatives are still something that satisfies our need and what we are after in that scenario. So essentially this DEAR MAN acronym, the DEAR helps us know what to say, and the MAN helps us know how to say it. So describe, express, assert, and reinforce what it is that we want to communicate. And we're doing it in a way where we are being mindful of our position, we're appearing confident in the way that we communicate, and we are also showing a willingness to negotiate if the situation calls for it. So I really do encourage you to think about how you might be able to apply this in your daily life. And as I said, if there's any situations coming up that you think might be difficult to sort of work through and have in the moment, this can be a really useful guide. Actually sit down and write out for yourself 4 sentences you might say, and think about if there's any ways in which you might be steered off topic by the other person, if there's any things that might cause you to lose confidence, and if there are or are not things that you're willing to negotiate on. It's always best if we can have done a bit of pre-thinking before we're in these situations where possible. And the more that we actually use a skill and a strategy like this, the more confident we become at then being able to use it in the moment. So we don't actually need to sort of pre-plan it, but we become more skillful at using something like the Dear Man strategy. So a few kind of key takeaway points to summarize what we've been talking about. When we're having an interpersonal interaction, it may be useful for us to think about what is the priority here? And maybe there's more than one priority, but what's my focus if there is one or if there are multiple? How can I maintain and manage the objective of the interaction I'm having with someone, the relationship I have with them, and also the ability for me to maintain self-respect? The second point is we always want to be thinking about assertive communication for ourselves to help us maintain respect, not only for ourselves, but the other person. And if we are someone who tends to operate on ends of this sort of passive and aggressive spectrum, it might feel like if we move away from being passive, that we're actually jumping up the other end to being assertive. But in reality, we're just communicating in an assertive way. So it's useful to kind of notice for yourself what that shift feels like if you do find yourself moving up or down that spectrum. And then finally, the Dear Man acronym can help us structure and have difficult conversations with other people, while we also balance the various elements of the interpersonal interactions. So the objectives, the relationship and connection, and then our self-respect as well. So I hope this video has been useful for you and given you not only some things to think about, but a bit of a practical tool and strategy to help you if you are having difficult conversations with people. So thank you for watching.